As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.
Before you can create norms and get countries to internalize, to abide by the norms, you have to create some sort of balance of power. The balance of power right now is changing, shifting. And countries like China would hope that it can, make the balance of power, to turn the balance of power to its own favor, maybe now, in the next couple of years, in the next couple of decades. And so everybody's expectation is for the future. It's not now. So what do we need is action.
From the Daniel K. Inouye Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii, welcome to another episode of the Security Nexus webinar, where we explore the most pressing security challenges and geopolitical shifts shaping our world today. I'm your host, James Minnich, Colonel United States Army retired and professor here at DKI APCSS. Now, it's a pleasure to have you with us for episode 27, Navigating Tensions in the South China Sea. The South China Sea has emerged as one of the most strategically significant and contested regions in the world, covering an area of over 3.5 million square kilometers. It's a vital maritime route and home to an abundant resource, including fisheries, oil, and natural gas reserves. With roughly 1/3 of global maritime trade passing through its waters, it's crucial for East and Southeast Asian economies and global commerce. However, it has become a flashpoint for geopolitical rivalry, threatening regional stability and global security. At the core of the dispute is China's expansive territorial claims, encapsulated by its 9-dash line, a demarcation that seeks to assert sovereignty over almost the entire South China Sea. Despite a 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration ruling that invalidated these claims under international law, China continues to pursue its ambitions through military buildup, diplomacy, and economic leverage. China's development of artificial islands with military facilities has shifted the balance of power in the region. China's actions have not gone unchallenged. Several Southeast Asian nations, including Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia, have competing claims backed by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. However, the military and economic asymmetry between these nations and China complicates the enforcement of their claims. The United States, which has long advocated for freedom of navigation and the upholding of international law, plays a pivotal role in this geopolitical chessboard. Through naval patrols, diplomatic engagement, and alliances with regional partners, Washington seeks to counterbalance China's growing influence. Other global powers, such as Japan and Australia, are also invested in maintaining open and secure shipping lanes and preventing any one nation from exerting hegemonic control over the region. Beyond the geopolitical tensions, the South China Sea raises broader questions about the future of international order and multilateralism. ASEAN, the regional bloc of Southeast Asian nations, has attempted to mediate the dispute and negotiate a code of conduct with China. Yet, progress has been slow, and internal division with ASEAN complicate this unified response. In this complex web of national interest, territorial disputes, and international law, the South China Sea is a critical test for global diplomacy. Whether through conflict or negotiation, resolving tensions in the South China Sea will have far-reaching implications for the security, economy, and political dynamics of the Indo-Pacific and beyond. Today, we have the privilege of exploring these complex issues with two experts in the field, Dr. Virginia Bacay Watson and Dr. Alexander Vuving. They're colleagues of mine and professors here at DKI APCSS. Jeannie and Alex, super glad to have you on the episode. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. By convention, I like to invite my guests to tell us their journey And so perhaps you'll do that. You'll share with us your story about how you came to being an expert here in this field. Alex, maybe you'll begin.
Oh, yes. So I was born in Vietnam. And so I would naturally drawn to anything that happens to the country. And the bloody clash between Vietnam and China in the South China Sea, in the Spratly Islands, happened in 1988 when I was in Hungary. At that time, I was not in Vietnam at that time. However, I was also interested in that, and I got an interest in the South China Sea issue. But at that time, I thought that the South China Sea dispute would become a very key aspect of regional security going forward. And so in the 1990s, I began to study the South China Sea issues, and I have been following the events in the South China Sea since then. So
yeah, no. I know that even here, I'm constantly listening to you lecture on this issue, and so today we're going to be able to pull from a wealth of your experience and knowledge in this area. And so thanks for sharing that. Before we go though, Virginia, I mean, you were on the show before, and so I know you've shared with us before, but maybe you might share a little more.
Well, I was born of course, and raised in the Philippines, for those of you who don't know. And so I speak a couple of the dialects in the Philippines. I grew up in different part of, not in Manila, outside Visayas actually. I still try to speak those wherever I can and whenever we have, there's an opportunity to do that. And so, but I've always also been interested, like Alex, in the fate, the destiny of the Philippines. When you're born there, there's a natural interest, predisposition to kind of be really interested in what's going on in the history of the country where you were born.
Yeah, no, indeed, that without a doubt. Let's go ahead and begin. It's a massive topic to cover in such a short period of time, but let's start by talking about the strategic importance of this region. You know, I began in the opening about how the South China Sea is a vital maritime corridor and it's rich in resources, essential to global trade, and it's making it a hotspot for the strategic and economic interests without a doubt. So just help us understand, why does the South China Sea play such a critical role in both regional and global security dynamics?
So I think, as you prefaced, I think the key strategic significance of the South China Sea to global affairs is its location. Its location is one of the busiest trading routes in Asia. The lifeline of Asia runs through the South China Sea, and the shortest route between the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean runs through the South China Sea. And for countries like Japan, China, South Korea, Taiwan, they depend on the South China Sea. And the South China Sea is where you get all those a lot of goods between Northeast Asia were shipped to Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and so on. So South China Sea is so important for its location, but at the same time, that's for global affairs for every country on Earth. But for the countries surrounding the South China Sea, it's also important in terms of its resources. We have oil and gas and fish and minerals and everything else. So it's rich in resources. At the same time, South China Sea is also important in terms of defense. Just imagine that, a foreign country, if they want to invade your country on land, they have to be a neighbor, a land neighbor, or they have to get access through a land neighbor.
That's right.
But in order to invade a country from the coast, you just go there. Anybody can, if you have a ship on the ocean, you can invade any other country that has a coastline. And so the South China Sea is so important for those countries surrounding, for China, for Vietnam, for the Philippines, for Malaysia, because of the coastline, And then also lately we also have the issue of nationalism. So the South China Sea dispute has become a sort of a symbol for nationalism in China, in Vietnam, and now also in the Philippines. Jeannie, you want to add something?
Well, in addition to what Alex said, I'm just thinking about the fact that although all these the reasons why the South China is important is certainly the environmental, economic, all these reasons, but depending on the context is depending on which parts of the history we're also talking about.
Right.
Then you have a little more nuance to the understanding why that is so. Maybe around, let's say in the 1960s, it wasn't so important to the Philippines because it was then part of the security umbrella of the United States. So there wasn't a whole lot of attention paid to that. But fast forward to today, and by God, the whole area is so important for all the, for all the right reasons in a way. So depending on which country, the kind of leadership they've had, and also the national interest at that particular period of time, certain rationale or basis would matter more than the other basis for the strategic importance of the area.
No, I mean, both of you are spot on. And Jeannie, your comment about, looking at this through time, that it matters. You come out of Second World War, the focuses were elsewhere, and yet actions were in fact happening. But it's only through time as UNCLOS comes to being, and the EEZ and finding of resources, all of this builds, and I hope we can pull on some of this. And I want to pull a little bit on China's expansionist claims. And so its 9-line claim and its activities to, building artificial islands. I mean, these reflect its desire over the South China Sea, despite international opposition, which we spoke about. And there's a lot to talk here on this. I'll let you pull on this as you want, but here's the question. What are the key motivations behind China's territorial ambitions in the South China Sea? You want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think you have already hinted at that the motivations that China has with regard to the South China Sea has been evolving.
Yes.
And originally it was historical. Originally it was in the early 20th centuries, there was narrative about the lost territories, that the territories that China has lost to other empires, to other countries like Japan, Russia, France, and Britain, and so on and so forth. And the South China Sea Islands were among those gradually become sort of the lost territories that China has, thought of. And so it was originally historical motivation of getting back the lost territories. But then increasingly, there is a very big chunk of motivation for China that is strategic, because China has experienced in the 19th centuries and 20th centuries, most of the invaders came from the sea, like Japan and Britain and so on. And so for China, thinking in terms of defense of China, the South China Sea has become so important for China in terms, you need to take control of South China Sea in order to ward off potential invaders.
That's right.
And so the South China Sea, has become important for China in terms of defense. And then China has harbored the idea of becoming a regional power, and then the global power, and then a global maritime power. And so, for China to become a global maritime power, it has to also to get free access to the ocean. And the South China Sea, in China's perspective, is part of the first island chain that limits China's reach out to the ocean. So for China, in order to become a global maritime power, it has to break through the first island chain, and then the second island chain, and so on and so forth. And so it has set for itself the ambition of taking control or dominance of the waters within the first island chain, like that is East China Sea and the South China Sea, and then the second island chain, and so on. So that strategic motivation became second, and then you also have the resource bit of it. So basically, I think three major motivations for China: historic, strategic, and economic.
Well said. Very well said.
I would just probably add to that the ambitions of Xi Jinping, his desire, his dream to make that as part of his legacy, very important to him for sure, is to annex Taiwan and the part of the major part of the South China Sea. That's always been a running motif of his maybe his plan for during his reign as the supreme leader of China. And I think that's a very important factor to consider, and I think that's something we should consider. And of course, the relationship of the party to the Chinese public, very important. Always, they always have that as a reason for being. Like in other words, like they use the claims of China to either galvanize the Chinese people or to appease them and so forth. So that's been a very useful tool for them.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. Let's pull on this aspect of the international community. Let's talk about the role of international law in this aspect. So UNCLOS, and so this is actually, I think, it was signed in 82 and went into force in like 94, somewhere around there. It was, I mean, this has provided a legal framework for resolving maritime disputes through, even though China has largely ignored this. And I spoke about that in the opening. So here's the question. How has the international legal framework, particularly UNCLOS, influenced the South China Sea disputes?
Yeah, so UNCLOS provides the foundation for the international order in the maritime domain. And particularly, UNCLOS is a legal framework that acknowledges the equality among different countries, irrespective of their size and power. And so UNCLOS would provide the foundation for the rule of law in the maritime domain.
That's right.
It would provide the foundation for the equality among countries, equality before every country would be equal before the law. And at the same time, the law is above every other country, every country, irrespective of their size and power. And so that is UNCLOS. It provides this equal, rules-based order. However, China doesn't accept that aspect of UNCLOS, even though China signed UNCLOS. But China is pursuing a different kind of international order in the maritime domain. China sees the fairness of UNCLOS as unfair to China because it doesn't recognize China's bigness. And so remember what then China's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Yang Jiechi, said at the ASEAN Regional Forum meeting in 2010, that China is a big country and other countries are small countries. And that's the fact. Right. And so China wants everybody, other countries to accept and acknowledge the fact that China is big and other countries are small. And so what China is doing is imposing its hierarchical international order on the maritime domain, basically to supplant UNCLOS with its 9-dash line, which is the expression of China's big and other countries are small.
Yeah, so without international law, there's no way to level between big and small countries, is what you're saying. Virginia, you were going to say something.
I think in a way it also exposed the shortcomings itself, ironically, of the law, because China was able to just turn its back and say, well, we don't abide by the decision. So it really exposed also the limitations of the law, in that someone as an emerging power, and like China, whose economy is really is global, and and a lot of countries that depend on its economy, can just thumb its nose and say, well, we don't believe in that, and we have our own basis for our claims, and that's what we'll believe. That's what we'll follow and believe. So that, in a way, also, and without any teeth to the law, then it's that's where we are today, right? And it's just the Philippines can claim a higher moral ground. But and then what?
I mean, that's the case almost with anything. Is how do you enforce a rule? Yeah. How do you enforce the law? Yeah. It's only really enforceable if people self-regulate, or if there's some other type of force that puts enough pressure on them, and that's kind of where we find ourselves in this instance, right? is there's no mechanism for making it happen. Yeah. Well, in those ways of trying to force convention, let's talk just a little bit about the U.S.'s FONOPS. I mean, the U.S. conducts these freedom of navigation operations, and it does it to challenge China's maritime claims and then to affirm the principles of free passage in international waters. I'm reminded of years ago when I served as the secretary of the Military Armistice Commission in Korea. We had the authority, the ability to fly into right there in the JSA, right there in Panmunjom, inches away from North Korea. And if we didn't exercise it, we would soon, over a period of time, lose the ability to do it. It would be challenged, right? If to do something that no longer has been exercised. And so we find ourselves perhaps with FONOPS, that a similar type of thing. Let me ask you this question. How effective then have FONOPS been in countering China's assertion in the South China Sea? And what are the potentials of these operations escalating into tensions?
Yeah, I think the U.S. freedom of navigation operations, the FONOPS, are not effective by itself. It has to be combined with other measures, stronger measures, to be able to deter China. But FONOPS, I acknowledge that FONOPS is not designed to deter anybody. It's just designed to express U.S. commitment to international law in the maritime domain. But if that, then okay, so everybody knows that you are committed to the international order. However, as you said, how do you enforce, the order? And then FONOPS doesn't, include the enforcement aspect. So in FONOPS, it by itself is not enough. And even sometimes I think FONOPS may be counterproductive in that it, on the one hand, it doesn't deter China. On the other hand, it would encourage China to be more assertive.
Yeah, well said, Richard.
You're
good.
Yeah.
All right, well, let me ask you then about regional responses. Yeah, Southeast Asian nations and ASEAN, I mean, they have varying responses to China's assertiveness. But they balance their national interests, they use diplomacy. They have different ways they try to bring about a change in the conditions that are going on there in the region. So let me ask you this. How have ASEAN and the individual member states like the Philippines, like Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, I mean, how do they balance their national interests with regional security?
Well, I think regional security is part of the national interest of those countries in the region because they need national security for their own they need regional security for their own national security also, and for their economic development and for many other objectives. So regional security is part of their national interest. However, you also have other aspects in your national interest. For example, for the Southeast Asian claimants in the South China Sea, like Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, they also need to care about their territorial integrity. And when you balance your territorial, you want to pursue your territorial integrity, but at the same time, you also want to pursue regional security, and the two conflict with each other. So you need to make a balance. For other countries in Southeast Asia, for example, Thailand, or Singapore, Cambodia, they don't have, their territorial integrity is not involved in the South China Sea. And so for them, the question about regional security is somewhat independent from their, pursuit of territorial integrity. And so the question of regional security means different for them. So regional security means different for different countries. For the Southeast Asian claimants, they have to balance, right? And so I think that they are integrating different lines of effort into the mix of their strategy for the South China Sea. Different lines of efforts like pursuing quiet diplomacy with China, trying to promote international norm and law, try to build their own military and gray zone forces, and some try to internationalize the issue. So there are different elements in the mix, and they are not pursuing each of the elements to the extreme. They try to pursue each of the elements to some extent, and so try to hope that a combination of some of this, some of that would make the balance.
Yeah.
For me to be, in addition to what Alex has said, I think also of the relationship of every ASEAN nation to the powers, the great powers. That matters a lot in the calculations of these countries as to how to balance their national security interest vis-a-vis the regional security interest. Because regional security will always involve emerging power plus the United States at the very least. But we have Japan, we have Australia. So that is a consideration that needs to be thought of also, that would further nuance in your analysis of that, of their sort of the balancing act that they're trying to do. And I think the other important also factor that I can think of is to what extent they still have a sense of strategic agency. In other words, every country would be placed very differently. If you were in a spectrum, then every country would perceive themselves to be either really independent or not, and then therefore they can chart their own course and without any problems. That some countries are self-sufficient and some other countries are wholly dependent on other powers that be, or at the same, or in other words, have a very difficult time trying to balance, because that sense of decision that they have to chart their own fate is no longer there, if at all.
I want to pull the conversation a little bit and talk about naval power projection. China, as well as the other regional powers, they're enhancing their military capabilities, especially their naval power. And they're doing this, to assert influence in the contested waters here in the South China Sea. So let me ask you this question. How is it that these naval modernizations and strategies are affecting the strategic balance in the region?
Well, I think the efforts by the Southeast Asian claimants to mobilize, to modernize their naval forces are not enough to balance what China has done in the last couple of decades, and so it doesn't really make a big difference. So China continues to dominate the South China Sea, also in terms of its capabilities, and the trend is just continuing.
When you look over time, and you said the last couple of decades, and frankly, the last decade, and even China's growth is significant. Maybe you might help just a little bit the audience appreciate, that this is not a stagnant or a very slow growth. China is really advancing across the area. That's actually not just challenging the region, but it's challenging the U.S. and some of its allied partners to try to counter this, which goes to your larger point that a single nation in the region is woefully incapable. I don't know if you want to add anything to that thought. Anything, Alex?
Well, I think, you have already hinted at that the best strategy for regional countries to deal with this situation is to coalesce. So every country that is committed to a international order on the maritime, which is based on rule of law, which is UNCLOS, will have to get together and act together.
I remember we had an episode sometime back with Sam Mullins. We spoke about the gray zone, and maybe we'll just pull, and that was the audience may even go in and watch that entire episode and pull deeper on this topic. But let's talk about China's maritime militia and its use of gray zone tactics as it deploys that militia and its Coast Guard to assert control without actually, provoking a full-scale military conflict. So let me ask you this question. What impact have China's gray zone tactics had on regional stability in the region? And can the regional actors actually effectively respond?
Yeah, I think China has been very successfully deploying gray zone operations by shifting the balance of power in favor of China without causing any outright conflict. And so on the surface, you can see that there's no military conflict in the South China Sea, but during the last couple decades or so, China has turned the balance of power. And so in, let's say 2 decades in the past, the balance of power is a little balanced like this, but now China has already dominated the South China Sea with its presence, not only in terms of military presence, but civilian presence and the presence of the militia. So gray zone operations, all of the gray zone operations that China is pursuing the South China Sea has put China in a dominant position. For the other countries, I think they also have an interest in not escalating conflict to a military conflict. And so they need to improve their gray zone capabilities individually and collectively. And so because they are small countries and they don't have a lot of resources. And so they really need the support from other countries outside the region, particularly countries like the United States, Japan, or even India, Australia, South Korea, in terms of boosting their collective capabilities in the gray zone areas. And I think here Jeannie has a great idea about that, right?
Well, I was just actually I was thinking about in terms of the Philippines and some of the other countries. I think the reason why the balance of power shifted is because no responses were to be had. The existing frameworks, the existing sort of policies and strategies are now no longer adequate, or were found to be inadequate vis-a-vis the employment of China's full-on gray zone. How would you respond to that? For example, given the Mutual Defense Treaty with the United States, right? So it exposed the limitations of a post-World War II treaty to new realities, and then that had no, we had no answer for. Those conditions were not specified in the treaty. So perhaps one idea would be to amend the treaty or to put in a clause, an additional clause that would really be specifically designed to respond to gray zone provocations and gray zone actions of other, such that it is not just an armed attack on military personnel, but also on civilians and civilian ships. We're thinking about those delivering the food to the Sierra Madre, right?
Right.
So that would, I think, that would be maybe something that that could be considered by both the governments of the Philippines and the United States, because as it stands now, even in Tokyo, in Japan, I think they're at a loss how to respond to that. And then some other scholars, I think, were thinking about responding in a way of coming up with a countermeasure, which legitimizes supposedly illegitimate measures as a way to respond. And then you make that as a, sort of like a legitimate, you raise it to that level of legitimacy, and they've called it countermeasure. I forget who the author of that was, but I think that would make sense as well in terms of just trying to counter more effectively, I think, the ever so increasing, aggression of the Chinese and the bullying and so forth. And as one author said, I think he said that the gray zone operations is a strategic challenge with a military dimension. It's not a military problem with a military solution. And I think that's what Alex also was referring to, is that it's strategically, it poses a challenge. They're talking about the balance of power, that's the conversation. So that's where it is. And if you want to win that, you have to be present. As Alex said, they've just dominated literally the space. And so both figuratively and literally. And so the United States and other allies should really be more present there and in the region, and invite the others to really press have more of these kinds of exercises and drills and this sharing of technology and all these kinds of information, improving all the protocols, and talk about exactly what kind of gray zone lessons they've all learned from each other and communicate and share, I think.
Let's pull on that a little bit more and talk about, I mean, okay, tensions are high, and you rightly said there may not be a military solution to what we got going on out there. So then there must be opportunities for diplomatic engagement, conflict prevention, cooperative agreements. And so maybe you could just talk about some of these paths to cooperation, conflict mechanisms. I alluded in the opening about the code of conduct. You can speak more on that. And so I'll go from there and suggest some ways that non-military responses that we can get after these issues. What do you think?
Well, I think the code of conduct is either window dressing or a trap.
Okay, explain more.
Because a code of conduct is now negotiated between China and the 10 countries in ASEAN, right? And so in order to be valid, to be born, the code of conduct has to be approved by China. And China, remember again, Yang Jiechi's statement in 2010, China is a big country. Other countries are small countries. That's the fact. And so any code of conduct that can be approved by China will have to reflect that fact that China is a big country and other countries are small countries. Rather than reflecting the spirit of UNCLOS, which is every country is equal before the law, the code of conduct, if it's to be approved by China, will have to reflect the fact that China is a big country and other countries are small countries. And so basically, so in actuality, that kind of code of conduct, if it can be signed by China, will have to reflect some part of the 9-dash line that China is claiming the South China Sea. We'll have to enshrine some sort of mechanisms that reflect the hierarchy, the asymmetry in power between China and the other countries. And so here I just let me pull out China's solemn position. China has declared solemn position on the South China Sea issue in 2022 when China, tried to force the other countries in ASEAN to make a deadline for the negotiation of the code of conduct. And so China declared the solemn position on the South China Sea here. The first one is China and ASEAN countries are committed to properly handling differences through bilateral consultation and negotiation in accordance with the declaration on the code of conduct on the conduct of parties in the South China Sea, DTOC. So what does that mean? That China narrowed the avenues of settling the dispute between China and the other ASEAN countries through bilateral consultation and negotiation in accordance with the OC, which means excluding all the legal avenues provided by UNCLOS. And you know that the legal avenues provided by UNCLOS would elevate smaller countries into an equal footing with any great powers. Now, China doesn't want that. So I want to exclude that. When you are negotiating and pursuing bilateral, negotiation, consultation with China, you are small countries and China is a big country. And you know the outcome of that kind of negotiation and consultation, right? The second point in China's solemn position on South China Sea issue is the biggest risk to peace and stability in the South China Sea is precisely the inappropriate intervention and frequent interference by major countries outside the region. So a very consistent point that China wants to push through in the negotiation for the code of conduct is to exclude what China calls external countries outside the region. Another point is non-regional countries should abide by their duties and earnestly respect the efforts made by countries in the region to maintain peace and stability in the South China Sea. So here again, China segregate the world into two classes. Outside countries, you have nothing to get here. Here is the South China Sea is for the South China Sea, for China and this in the ASEAN countries. So you're outsiders. So consistent effort by China to basically exclude other countries outside the region out from regional issue in the South China Sea, and also to include to some extent China's hierarchical vision of China as a big country and other countries in the South. And so a code of conduct, if a code of conduct is signed by China, it will, reflect a hierarchical order rather than reflect UNCLOS. And so when it's in effect signed by all China and the ASEAN countries, it will supplant UNCLOS. And so what we're going to have in that case, if we have the code of conduct in South China Sea, you're going to have not UNCLOS, but a China-centric hierarchical order in South China Sea. That's why it's a trap.
Go ahead, Virginia.
For me, it's I think if you want to deter China from their actions, I think you have to increase the cost for them if you were to deter them. In other words, the United States and its allies and other friends should ensure that every time there's bullying happening and all this use of water bombing and all these kinds of things that they're employing, they have to think twice before they do that if the costs are greater for China at least. So that means perhaps not just the action, the theater should not be limited to the waters, but rather to other policies like economics and so forth. So because gray zone is not just in the waters, it's gray zone is defined the way I take it as really something that's a comprehensive kind of a approach to all kinds of things that are in between what I call the area between the blur and betweenness. It's really in between, right? Below the threshold and so forth. And so that's something to consider perhaps. And at the same time, you could in the waters perhaps the United States could expand the area of action, not just focus on the Sierra Madres area and include everything else, and that way that the Chinese Coast Guard is going to have to thin out their paramilitary forces and so forth. And I think the other question, the solution, or at least something to think about is, it's never been naval, it's always been Chinese Coast Guard. So something that has to include, I think, some treaty or something like that has to include that the fact that their main institution has been the Coast Guard. It's never been the Navy. So that is something of consideration as well. They're not avoided, it's to avoid the militarization, right? So how do you cover that particular sort of dimension of the situation of gray zone when you have one particular institution that's focused, but that's not covered by any other by the treaties in existence?
And this is tough,
Yeah.
which is why we're grappling at it for so long. I think it was maybe a decade ago in 2014 that the WPNS, what is it, the Western Pacific Naval Symposium signed including China, signed the cues for being able to, it's not binding, but it's how to respond to open water encounters in the seas, right? And so they agreed to then a decade ago to sign a type of a engagement document. And so I asked myself, things are tough, and you say, okay, if you're going to negotiate, you got to believe you can get something better than doing nothing at all. And it also reminds me of the old Sears Roebuck catalog where you buy a pair of shoes, it was good, better, best. And we always want the best, but maybe we just can't afford it. We can't get there. But is there something still good we can get, a good pair, a good something? And I wonder if in this, holding out for the best option may just not get us there for the reasons we've spoken about here, and that there may be a lower something goodness that can be achieved. I don't know. Have you thought about whether there are degrees of things we might be able to work toward to get, so it could be something which it puts us in a better position than when we seem to find ourselves today out in the South China Sea? Any thoughts on either?
Well, they could maybe in the United States invite the Chinese for some exercises and normalize that, make that as part of a new norm in some ways, and develop a new habit. They're norm making. So why don't you counter that with another different kind of norm that is based on the rules of the sea, that as we know it? That's that's not going to cost anything except to invite them in some kinds of drills and so forth, and sustain that, and always there. I don't know if that's going to help any, but the fact that they're going to be part of that whole movement, maybe it might give them a pause at least. I think I don't know. That's just one way. Of course, it's a diplomatic. Options are always open, but to point out that Q's though is naval, I think.
Right.
It's not really Coast Guard.
That's correct.
So that's again, there you go. So
no, I guess I use it as an example of just a decade ago there was a willingness to sit down, talk, and sign something. 10 years is a long time, though. I know. Alex, anything you want to?
I think you want to create some sort of norms, and you want other countries to internalize the norms. That would happen in a normal time when you have, when generally cooperation would prevail over competition. We are in a different era now. We are in a new era of heightened great power competition, in a new era where international order in general is weakened. And so this is a different era. And so the logic of this era defies the linear logic of, trying to get the best and try to sit down and talk to each other and try to, no more. Before you can create norms and get countries to internalize, to abide by the norms, you have to create some sort of balance of power. The balance of power right now is changing, shifting. And countries like China would hope that it can, make the balance of power, so to turn the balance of power to its own favor, maybe now, in the next couple of years, in the next couple of decades. And so everybody's expectation is for the future. It's not now. So what do we need is action. I don't think negotiation can help.
Well, thanks for putting that a little bit into perspective. I mean, it is, as you've said, these are different times, and as a result, may require different types of thinking than linear thinking we've had in the past. Let's go ahead and transition to audience questions. We have several. We've got a little bit of time left. The first question asks us about mitigating China's aggression. How can China's aggressive behavior be mitigated, and what are the best strategies to create a security environment grounded in the international rules-based order?
I think I've made some suggestions. Alex, have anything else?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to create a balance of power, which is conducive to the kind of international order based on international law. So based on the rule of law. If you want to reestablish the rule of law in the maritime domain, you need to create a conducive balance of power. The current balance of power in the region is not conducive to that. It's conducive to China's unilateral imposing of its hierarchical order. And so, the first thing, you need to create a balance of power. And that means that every country that is committed to maintaining or maintaining the rules-based order or UNCLOS, committed to UNCLOS, will have to get together, act together, help each other to enhance their capabilities in the gray zone area as well as in combat area, so that they can show China that China's aggressiveness will have, China will have to pay a price for its transgression, for violation of the rules-based order.
I think another idea would maybe internally speaking for the different countries who are in the region, maybe to think about passing a bill or passing some kind of law that would sort of provide legitimate cover for their actions, other gray zone actions, as framed as a defense of territory and so forth. So pass a bill of some sort that really directly addresses that. I haven't seen any amongst the countries that have sort of initiated or authored any of that kind of legislation. Perhaps that would be a starting point from within. And if all countries could agree to do that, Japan, all the other countries, the Philippines, and even the other claimants and so forth, and that could be, and they share the same or similar across the board, then that would be a basis for collective action in that sense, because it's all kind of nation based, right? They're responsive, but if they have the legitimacy, then they could collectively actually act.
No, thanks for that. Virginia, this next one is going to go to you, asking about U.S. support for the Philippines. And so, short,
Yep.
how can the U.S. provide enhanced support to the Philippines in the South China Sea without escalating tensions?
Well, they've been doing so far so good. I mean, they've been increasing their presence there. President Marcos has, increased the bases from 5 to 9. They're helping the Filipinos in more ways than one. But I think what's also needed, I said, is a rethink of the treaty. I've already mentioned that, the Mutual Defense Treaty. I think they could also think about expanding, encouraging, the Philippines to which I think the Philippines is doing also on its own now to sort of widen their strategic, in a way, or create a little more strategic advantage by reaching out to other countries sharing in the same situation like Japan, which they have also done, elevating partnerships to strategic. For in the case of Australia, India's the sales of equipment or technology is covered, and I think. But I think the most important is presence and commitment. That is something that's like Alex alluded to earlier. The failure of, if right now, I believe about 30% of the Philippines EEZ has been salami sliced by the Chinese, more or less, and so that's 30%. And that's going to grow in the future. I'm very pessimistic that it's not going to stop at 30%. It will be a failed alliance if that's going to eventually, if it continuously increases. And that's not the credibility issue of the United States, of course, will suffer in that respect, not just the Philippines. So I think it's if there's a motivation on both sides, that would be one. And at the same time, also, the presence of the United States, a big presence, huge presence, is desired. I think amongst all the countries in the region, they've always wanted that the United States be present there, not just the Chinese. So in that sense, it's not either or, but it's just that prevents them from really choosing again that false choice of U.S. or China.
This next question posits, the U.S. is a non-signatory state to UNCLOS, and so does that fact hinder its ability to address PRC's violations in the South China Sea?
I don't think so. So in terms of U.S. capability, even if the U.S. is not a signatory to UNCLOS, it does have the capability to go to the South China Sea. Also, the fact is that the U.S. military and Coast Guard are abide by UNCLOS as part of the customary international law. However, the fact that the United States is not a signatory to UNCLOS does hurt the U.S. in the battle of narratives, in the battle for public opinion. So that's important.
And I guess it also, because it's not a member, because it's not a signatory, it could not actually, like the Philippines did, it can't refer China to the Court of Arbitration. Right? Can't do that because it's not a member. Next question is asking about impact of China's economic instability if China's economy weakens,
Mhm.
which some say it may be doing, how likely is it that the tensions in the South China Sea will increase?
I think the two things are largely independent
Okay.
because China is too big. And even if China's economy is weakened to some extent, it doesn't really reduce China's capability to act in the South China Sea.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I think I'm not sure exactly the meaning, but as I was thinking of this, it was if you have problems domestically, internally, then you seek to rally the people by an external. And so if they're having internal economic problems, would they use that as an excuse to push harder in the South China
Yeah, I
Sea?
think China has already been doing that,
that.
you know, to spur to use the South China Sea issue as a rallying point for nationalism domestically. So it has already been.
Yeah, I think in the interest, we'll take this one last question, and it's asking about the future, and so the future security in the South China Sea. So, given the current situation that we've been speaking about, how do you see the security dynamics in the South China Sea evolving over the next 5 years?
Yeah, this is very hard. I think the current trend is China continues to increase its presence, military and otherwise, in the South China Sea, to continue to dominate the South China Sea space. And I don't see significant effort by other countries to stop that tendency. Then the South China Sea issue will be complicated by the bigger issue of great power competition between the US and China, and China's own effort to get Taiwan back. And so we don't know what China is thinking in terms of, you know, getting Taiwan back. South China Sea is right there. And so whatever China is doing in South China is doing in China, so it will have to be a part of its more larger strategy with regard to Taiwan. And so that's going to be very complicated. Yeah.
Virginia.
For me, it seems to me that there's been a tendency, increasingly so, of fissures, of splits, and you're on your own sort of thing. The ASEAN pretty much is now a little bit. It's not effective. It's kind of held, almost irrelevant in terms of just trying to find playing a role in the South China Sea, South China Sea dispute, and so I see more of that. More of the, like standalones, and I mean, nobody's helping the Philippines, not even one statement from anybody as of this moment. So I see that maybe it's growing, like Alex said, but I think one possible surprise would be if there was some kind of a, not deterministic, but one that could change the dynamics, would be technological invention, a technological innovation that would come from the United States or even from any other country that might change the dynamics. It could possibly affect also how countries relate to it. Technology plays an important role, and so I think that that's one possible source of an inject that might change the scenarios in the future.
Well, on this very sobering discussion, I have no doubt that the audience would like to know a little bit more. And so if they want to know more, I always invite guests to tell them how they can share a book recommendation with them. Virginia, maybe we'll start with you and then we'll.
I have this is a book that it's called The South China Sea Disputes, Philippine Sovereign Rights and Jurisdiction in the West Philippine Sea, by the retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio T. Carpio, who was part of the Hague team of the Philippines and defended and successfully defended, or at least the rights of the Philippines in terms of their entitlements of lands, and so, and of the features of the spratlys and so forth of the South China Sea. And so this is a book that is complete from history and documents and so forth. So it is a great source for those who want some documents of the sites, exactly the basis upon which the Philippines has made its case in the courts of international courts of law. Right?
What was the title again, Virginia?
As the South China Sea Dispute, Philippine Sovereign Rights and Jurisdiction in the West Philippine Sea by Antonio T. Carpio.
Wonderful. Alex.
And I would recommend the recent book by Greg Poling, titled On Dangerous Ground.
On Dangerous Ground, about the South China Sea. I think that came out a couple years ago. So wonderful suggestions. I have really enjoyed what has been a sobering discussion with you today on the South China Sea. So thank you for coming here and having this talk.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
Absolutely.
for having me.
As we conclude today's discussion, it's clear that addressing the South China Sea issue requires sustained diplomatic engagement, regional cooperation, and a firm commitment to international law to ensure long-term stability and security in this critical region. Now, I encourage you to join us on October 7 for our next Security Nexus webinar, Law and Rising Seas, with Dr. Joanna Sakira, an esteemed international lawyer and legal advisor specializing in legal warfare. In that session, we'll explore transformative legal measures essential for safeguarding the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and human security of the Pacific Island nations from existential threats amid rising sea levels and climate change. From all of us at the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii, thank you for being part of this important conversation. I'm James Minnich. Until we meet again, aloha oe. As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.